Abandoned places hold things. I'm not talking about forgotten objects or furniture covered in dust. I'm talking about something you feel when you walk into a place that shouldn't be inhabited anymore, and you realize it's not as empty as it seemed. The old woman in the rocking chair. When the narrator and his current wife first started dating, they had a habit of exploring abandoned houses and buildings looking for paranormal evidence. She genuinely believed in those things. He was skeptical, but went along with it because he liked the girl. Of all the adventures they had together, only one has remained unexplained to this day. It was an exceptionally dark night, with a cloudy sky that made everything feel even more somber. She had found an isolated house, far from any other structure, in precarious condition. It barely looked like it was still standing. The narrator always had a real concern in these situations. Not fear of ghosts, but the genuine fear that the building might collapse while he was inside. This particular house was especially unstable. To get in, he had to break down the front door, which was boarded up. The living room had half its floor missing. A massive hole in the center of the room revealed the remains of a basement below. He insisted they should leave, but she ignored him, as she always did, saying only to wait a little longer. While she rummaged through the junk-filled room, looking for remnants of the former residence, he stayed near the front door, distrusting the floor. Curiosity got the better of him, and he made his way to the room where she was. She then suggested he check upstairs, assuring him that the sooner they searched the whole house, the sooner they could leave. Reluctantly, he climbed the stairs carefully, fearing at every step that the deteriorated floor would give way. The first room on the right was an old bedroom with a bed still neatly made and a folded bathrobe at its foot, as if the resident had simply vanished overnight. In the corner of the room was a crawl space. Inside, he found boxes of diapers and jars of baby food, all intact but covered in thick dust, cobwebs, and rodent damage. The smell was strong. Just as he was about to leave, he heard a creaking sound. He lit up the space with his flashlight and discovered an opening in the corner, a narrow passage that ran the entire length of the house to the other bedroom. The sound was clearly coming from there. He was too big to crawl through the tunnel, so he left the crawl space and went down the hallway toward the other bedroom. The sound grew louder with every step. He mentally prepared himself to face a colony of raccoons. When he reached the bedroom doorway, he walked in silently and nearly fell backwards from the shock. A woman was sitting in a rocking chair, looking out the window. The back of the chair faced him, so he could only see the top of her head and what appeared to be a long skirt on her legs. She rocked slowly back and forth. He tried to see the reflection of her face in the window, but it was too dark. He took a step toward her, and the floor creaked. She immediately stopped rocking. He began to apologize, explaining that they didn't know anyone lived there. Before he could finish the sentence, she started rocking again as if he simply didn't exist. Instead of running, he took another step and asked if she was all right. She stopped again. Then she slowly stood up. Standing in front of the chair, she made a sound. Not words, but a low, continuous hum. Then suddenly she turned around quickly to face him. The abrupt movement made him jump. He turned and ran downstairs, screaming for his girlfriend that they needed to leave, that there was someone up there. She thought he was making it up and wanted to see for herself. No matter how much he pleaded, she went upstairs. When she reached the bedroom doorway, she said, "Oh my God," and then started laughing. The rocking chair was there, but empty. She searched the entire room and found no one. She mocked him for the scare. The two of them started heading downstairs when they heard it, the creaking of the chair starting again, and then the humming, a low, steady melody. She went back to the doorway and saw with her own eyes the figure sitting in the chair, humming to herself. Without saying a word, she turned and ran. Both of them sprinted out the door. Already in the car, she was screaming, asking what they had just seen. He said nothing. He wanted to look back at the house window as they drove away, but was too terrified to turn around. To this day, the couple cannot explain what they encountered that night. Maybe it was a very old woman living in extreme conditions. But the door was boarded up and there was a hole in the middle of the living room. Not exactly a place someone would choose to live. When they returned to the location years later, the house had been demolished. There wasn't even a trace that it had ever existed. The silhouette in the neighbor's window. When the narrator was still in middle school, his family moved to a new house in a neighborhood full of kids his age, almost perfect if not for the next-door neighbor. He was the stereotype of the mean old man. Any approach of the children near his yard, even without actually setting foot on it, was enough to make him start banging on the window and shouting. It was as if he watched the street constantly, waiting for any excuse to complain. This went on for 6 months without stopping. Then one day, silence. The window banging stopped. No shouting, no appearances. The narrator joked with his friends that the old man must have died. It was the only explanation for him finally stopping. About a month later, his friend Joel slept over. In the middle of the night, the two of them were woken by unusual commotion outside, siren lights coloring the room. Looking out the window, they saw 2 workers coming out of the neighbor's house carrying a zipped body bag. The feeling was heavy. Seeing that in real life, after having seen it in movies so many times, was completely different. But what weighed the most was the guilt. The narrator had joked about the man dying, and he really had died. Worse still, something in his gut told him the neighbor had passed away more than a month ago and had only now been found. The house sat abandoned for years. The old man's only son lived in another state and never came back. All the furniture and belongings were left behind. From his bedroom window, the narrator could clearly see into the interior of the house, and that detail always gave him chills, knowing someone had died in there. Over time, it became a running joke among friends. He would claim to have seen the old man's ghost, and Joel, who was always more easily scared, would cover his ears and beg him to stop. Everyone would laugh. One of those nights, Joel had enough of the teasing and dared the narrator to go inside the abandoned house. He initially hesitated, claiming that breaking in would be illegal, but Joel's taunting convinced him. After all, the house had been empty for years. Who would notice? The front door was locked and wouldn't budge when kicked. He didn't weigh much at the time, but a window beside it was unlocked and slid open with ease. Before climbing in, he looked back to make sure no one was watching. The moment he got inside, the smell hit him. It literally smelled like death. He pulled his shirt collar over his nose and started exploring. The house was exactly as the old man had left it. A book with a bookmark open on the armchair, a coffee mug on the kitchen table, a sweater draped over a chair. The smell was strongest in the kitchen, reinforcing the narrator's suspicion that the man had died there. The stove had dusty pots on the burners, but all of them empty. He continued down the hallway to the bedroom that faced his own bedroom window. Looking out, he saw all his friends outside waving at him. Joel looked incredulous that he had actually gone in. At that moment, a loud noise came from the other side of the house, like someone banging into the wall. It wasn't subtle. The narrator froze, waiting for a follow-up sound that never came. Not wanting to know anymore, he unlocked the front door and left quickly. When he told his friends about the noise and the smell, the story was heard with interest, but the subject soon changed. That same night, after everyone had fallen asleep, Joel woke the narrator saying he kept hearing strange noises coming from the neighbor's house. The narrator told him to go back to sleep. Obviously, it was his imagination working overtime after everything they had heard. But in the silence of that moment, both of them heard it. 2 loud knocks, unmistakable. The narrator jumped out of bed and looked out the window. Joel, terrified, asked what that silhouette was standing in the doorway of the old man's bedroom. The same room where the narrator had been just hours before. It was clearly the shape of a person. He tried to downplay it, saying it must be a coat rack. But then Joel screamed that the silhouette had moved. The scream woke the other friends. They all looked out the window and confirmed. There was a figure standing there, and it had moved from the doorway to the window. With the faint ambient light, they could see more clearly now that it was the unmistakable silhouette of a human being. As they watched in silence, the figure began walking back toward the bedroom doorway and disappeared into the darkness. The narrator tried to stay calm, saying it must be the old man's son having finally come back to deal with the house. The only explanation he could offer in that moment to keep his friends from total panic. They spent the rest of the night peering out the window every few minutes, but never saw anything again. About a year later, the old man's son did in fact show up. He brought a dumpster, cleared out the house, and sold it. Talking to the narrator's father, he revealed he had a terrible relationship with his father, and it took him years to finally come back and deal with the situation. The narrator never could explain what he saw that night. But unlike the other stories, this one had witnesses, several friends who all saw the exact same thing at the same time. And that detail, to this day, is what disturbs him the most. Every time the friends get together, even living in different states now, this story inevitably comes up. No one has an explanation, and perhaps it's better that way. The abandoned military village. In the narrator's hometown, there was an old abandoned military base, decommissioned in 1984 and demolished only in 2014. Throughout his childhood and adolescence, he and his friends heard legends about the place, from demonic cults to secret underground experiments. The narrator's older brother once walked into his room and claimed he had visited the village, describing a church with a secret door in the floor and sounds of moaning coming from the basement. Even if it was a lie to scare the boys, the story only fed the collective imagination about the place. For years, the narrator and his friends promised that once they had their driver's licenses, they would investigate personally. Two obstacles always held them back. They didn't know the exact location of the village, and they were afraid of the consequences of trespassing on military property. In their senior year of high school, a friend named Alex showed up claiming to know where the entrance was. The narrator was so certain it was a lie that he took the challenge, convinced they would never find anything. Around 11 p.m., the four friends, the narrator, Alex, Nick, and Scott, set out. Alex kept giving confusing directions along the way, asking to stop the car several times without finding anything, until they finally spotted an overgrown road with an old no trespassing sign nearly invisible among the trees. Even with the narrator hesitant, since it was his car, Alex and Nick insisted so much that he eventually gave in. With the lights off, the car rolled slowly down the dirt road. They soon found a security gate blocking the path. With no one at the checkpoint, the narrator got out and opened it manually. In the next stretch, they spotted furniture scattered along the roadside, beds, dressers, tables, as if an entire neighborhood had been abandoned in a hurry. After a second gate, they were inside the village. The feeling was surreal. The place looked like a normal neighborhood, but completely decayed, like the Upside Down from Stranger Things. There were no visible cameras, which made them feel slightly safer. They started with the church covered in graffiti. The narrator looked for the famous secret door his brother had described, but as expected, it didn't exist. Then they went to explore the houses. Some were destroyed, others surprisingly intact, and those were the scariest. Scott was terrified from the start, insisting that someone was nearby. The others dismissed his nervousness as imagination running wild from the environment. Inside one of the houses, everyone stopped suddenly at an unusual sound, wood creaking as if someone were walking on it. Alex shouted, asking if anyone was there, and the noise stopped immediately. The friends debated what could have caused it. Alex and Nick believed it was just the old house settling. Scott was certain they weren't alone. The narrator, overtaken by a growing feeling of unease, announced he wanted to leave. Since he had the car keys, the decision was his. As they walked toward the exit, Scott suddenly stepped back and pointed at a side window. Outside, 3 head-shaped shadows were moving across the wall of a neighboring house. The group froze in absolute silence. The narrator peered through the window and saw the shadows disappear into the backyard. He whispered that it was time to run to the car, and everyone bolted out the door. Scott, who was running ahead, let out a piercing scream. Standing beside the back door of the car was a tall woman dressed in an old and repulsive black dress. With one leg already inside the vehicle, she seemed about to get in. When she heard the scream, she let go of the door and ran into the church. The four of them ran to the car, checked the back seat, and sped away. The narrator briefly lost control of the car on the dirt road. Such was the speed. Afterward, they debated what they had seen. The most rational explanation was that those people were likely homeless and using the abandoned village as shelter. But the woman's behavior trying to get into the car remained inexplicable. The most disturbing part, reflecting on it later, was that they had walked around the place for quite a while without seeing any sign of human presence, and were only surprised at the very moment they decided to leave. The narrator ends by saying it was a very good thing that Scott screamed when he did. 10 more seconds, and who knows how that night could have ended. There are certain stories that we believe are not real, that they never happened, that they're just fiction. But these accounts that we witness today describe cases that people claim were entirely true. They had witnesses, and those people were haunted by them for the rest of their lives. The mystery that this world conceals is truly immense. We must be mindful not to dismiss what may be lurking right at our own doorstep.